Hey everyone, welcome to my GoPro settings for beginners guide. So I have a full GoPro tutorial for beginners, but I was requested a GoPro settings tutorial for explaining the settings that some people might not understand if they haven't really gotten into any videography or photography or anything like that. So in that one video that I just said, you'll have a full interface tutorial and you'll know how to get around. So if you want to do that, I suggest just seeing that video real quick. So if you don't understand some of the things I'm going to be doing in this video, that's what that will be. So these GoPro settings are mainly video settings and stuff like that, because the settings up here are explained in my other video. But to recap here, this one is voice control, so you'll be able to say something like, GoPro, take a video, and it'll start taking a video if you turn that on. If you turn this on, these are the beeps. I usually have my beeps off since, or at least for these videos, since I'm indoors and I don't want the beeping to sound when I'm indoors and stuff like that. Here we have quick capture, which is, in my opinion, really, really useful. Quick capture is when your GoPro is turned off and you press the button on the top, which is the shutter button, and a shutter button in photography means the button to take a photo or video. But when you press this, when the GoPro is actually switched off, so you don't have to even turn this on. When the GoPro is off, you can press this button on the top, and it'll automatically start recording without you having to press it on and change your video settings. It just right away starts recording like that. This is water lock, so it's called screen lock, but it's essentially what water lock would be. So if you're underwater, because water taps on your screen essentially, so if you try to do things, it's not going to work. So it's really secure. Once you get there, then you're out of water lock and you can turn it off. Here we have the video performance modes. So this is something you might not fully understand if you are completely new to GoPros. So this is maximum video performance. I always have that on. It's maximum resolution, so the videos are going to be high quality, and they have really high frame rates. So if you don't know what frame rate is, it's or FPS, interchangeable in videos. It means this video right here is 60 frames per second. And that means every second, 60 video frames will be shown. So it keeps flipping through these frames of video really fast, and each frame is kind of like a picture. And if you slowed it down, it would be picture, 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 and it would be really, really slow. So it's sped up to 60 frames a second. But if the camera wasn't recording 60 frames a second, and it was recording 30 frames a second, then it would only be showing 30 frames to you every second. I hope that kind of explains FPS. It has maximum frame rates and resolutions with stunning image quality, and you can also do ultra slow motion videos. Next we have extended battery. So this limits the video resolutions and frame rates just to, kind of extend your battery life. And this is the stationary video one. This is the optimized stationary video recording without airflow to cool the camera. So it's not gonna have airflow to cool it. And then hyper smooth, video stabilization, and GPS are turned off since you're only gonna be staying in one spot. So it might as well save that little bit of battery if you don't need it since it's on a tripod. All right, next up here we just have the screen on the back, which is this. I went over that in that video. If we go back down here, we can see that we have our standard preset. And if you watch that video, you'll know that in the preset screen, we have all these presets, and you can even add your own presets. But right now, I'm just gonna create a custom preset to show you what each thing is. So if we go into this plus button, you can have video or looping. So a looping preset is when it records video, and then if the storage is up, then it overwrites the first footage that was created and then keeps recording it from there, so you always have the newest footage. Video is what most people are going to use, and it just records videos. And if your storage is up, it'll just tell you, and then you can delete stuff. This is the mode, of course, that we just went to. So we can click that check there. And here we have the resolution in FPS. So the resolutions at the top right here are essentially how many pixels are in your video. We'll get to the top section here, but this is essentially how many pixels are shown in your video. So you will have 5.3K pixels shown in your video. Or right now, I typically have mine on 4K. That means that there are 4,000 video pixels. So it's just the more pixels you have, the higher quality the image can be. And if you don't even need the high quality, then you can just click 1080p, which is just standard HD, which is what this current video is recording in, the video you're watching right now. And down here we have the FPS. So if you have, like, the higher resolution you go, the less FPS you'll be able to use. As you can see, these get grayed out. But in 1080p, we can go all the way up to 240 frames a second, and that's really just used for slow motion video. And whenever you record a slow motion video on your GoPro, you're gonna have to slow it down later in a video editor. So that would be why, if it wasn't slowed down, you'd be a little confused. But that would be so that you can actually choose what parts are slowed down and which parts aren't. And if you don't really understand why higher FPS makes it slower, it's essentially because I explained in my previous video. If you have a 30 FPS video and you slow it down halfway, you'll be shown 15 frames every second. If you had a 60 FPS video and you slowed it down, you'd be shown 30 frames a second. But essentially, if you have higher frames per second, there will be more frames for you that you can actually slow it down, because it'll look less choppy. So if you notice here, we can see 1080p can go up to 240, 2.7K can also go up there, but then it starts going down when you get to 4K and 5.3K. Okay, so up here we have the 4:3 aspect ratio. The aspect ratio for these are all 16:9, which is the standard, which is the video you're watching right now. It's like a fraction, right? If you had, for example, 5/10, it would end up being 1/5, since you just simplified. And the aspect ratio is like the rectangle of your screen. If your rectangle is, maybe shortened a little bit and it's a little bit more on the vertical side, then it would be a different aspect ratio, a different ratio of sides of your video screen, then it would have a different aspect ratio. So 4:3 is actually very close to a square. Two sides are 3 and two other sides are 4. 4:3 aspect ratio, so the rectangle would be squashed in a little bit, but it would still be 4K. I typically just don't use these aspect ratios. And then once you set this, you just click on this middle part and then you're done. So with the lens is obviously this part on the GoPro, but when you record on the GoPro, it's a very, very wide lens. So this is what it is by default, Super View. It's the it's the widest video. But this doesn't actually change anything with the physical lens, because this lens, as you can see, it didn't really change. This just crops it digitally. So I typically just do wide. If you want, you can go to linear, but I typically never ever go anywhere narrower than that, because I can just zoom it in my video editor later. Here we have hypersmooth. So hypersmooth is when you have shaking your camera and then the video is all shaky. If you had it at max, if you did this, you wouldn't notice any shaking at all whatsoever. It does do a little bit of digital cropping, and you can't have the highest hypersmooth with the ultra wide lens, because it has to crop in and digitally realize how it's being moved. So if we were to move this down, I typically have mine at standard or off. Standard is, just a little bit of a shake, but you don't really need to have the max stabilization. And here I explained this stuff. This stuff is probably self-explanatory too, since it's not that into videos and stuff. But when you go down to Protune, we have some other things here. So bitrate is an interesting one. If you have your bitrate at high, it uses a lot of storage space, and apparently it gives you a lot more image quality. I haven't noticed that much of a difference, but if you really are getting a really professional video, then you'd have a high bitrate. There's a lot of higher image quality, and essentially if you go back to standard, it's a lower file size, but you're apparently just getting a little bit less quality, but as I said again, I don't really notice any difference. Okay, here we have the shutter. So it lets your GoPro automatically set how long the shutter stays open for your shot. So this is essentially, it lets more light in the longer the camera is open, and the longer it's taking the video or the photo. So for example, a faster shutter speed, 1/480 like this, requires more light to get a quality result. And in low light situations, you would actually use a slower speed, 1/60. and possibly a tripod, but that's not really part of these settings. So if you had your shutter set to 1/60, it would take a longer time. And if you had it out in the day, in the sun, it would be a really exposed image. It would have like so much white everywhere you wouldn't be able to see what's going on. But if you set the shutter to 1/480 on a sunny day, you would see the sunny day. It's just a little bit brighter, obviously. But if you had it on auto, it'll be smart with it, and it'll just, tell you, it'll just put it at whatever it thinks is best. Okay, so essentially if you had a higher speed, then you would have less light. And if you had it on a lower speed, 1/60, you would get more light into your camera since it's open for a longer amount of time. So over here we see EV comp is grayed out. You have to have this set to auto to be able to go into EV comp. And so this is the exposure value compensation, as it says here. It sets the brightness of your photos and videos. So adjusting the exposure compensation provides a natural correction for environments with contrasting light conditions, like a snow or a car interior or a stage with spotlights, etc. So if you have your EV comp set to 2, which is the highest, it'll have a higher brightness, and if you have it -2, it'll have a lower brightness. So experimenting with this can help you with low light. For example, I know a lot of people want to record in low light, and lower, if you actually make it higher, it'll be grainier video, so that's something about that. So this is just for a contrasty environment. You change this for the brightness, essentially. Here's the white balance. This adjusts the overall tone of videos. So obviously it varies by camera since the lenses are different. But here you see that we have auto, which is what we have. The GoPro will just decide which one it wants to use depending on the environment. Sometimes it's wrong if you have a lot of grass and then a blue sky. Then we have native, which is, let me see here. It's a native. This is the default. Like, this is just the camera. It's right from the camera. This is just the camera lenses, automatic colors with no GoPro processing or anything like that. And so if we go to over here, this is what you'd use in warm light. A higher one you'd use for slightly cool light, like cool fluorescent or average daylight. You can go to 650, and you'd see using cool light with an overcast condition. And so really, depending on your camera, you can just experiment with this and see what would be better. So it's just the balance of white in this image. If the colors don't look good, just change this. Okay, so here we have the ISO. So ISO provides more control in varying light conditions. So a higher ISO limit will result in brighter footage, but you might experience more digital noise, like graininess. A lower ISO limit will result in darker footage, but delivers reduced noise and graininess. So this doesn't impact the shutter speed, and the ISO settings also vary by the camera. So if we have the minimum ISO set to 100 on a bright sunny day, then it would be a little bit darker. But if we had the minimum ISO set to, for example, a higher value, then it would be a lot brighter. So if you have if you're in a dark room, for example, I keep going back to the low light. If you're in a low light condition, you'd want to set the ISO max to lower so that it wouldn't be as grainy. Here we have sharpness. It just controls how sharp or soft the image footage is. So if you have a high or medium sharpness, so these two benefit those who want to limit the amount of sharpening required in post-production. But then low sharpness is ideal for the professionals who prefer flexibility in the post-production. So if you're not going to do any editing, don't go down to low. But otherwise, I prefer to stay at medium, because if it's too sharp, it just looks weird in my opinion. Here we have color, and so the color allows you to adjust the color profile. So these can, so vibrant would be a very saturated, vibrant feel for those who like a pop in their colors and don't want to do any post-processing. Natural colors provide a realistic representation of the colors as you would see with your eyes. And then flat provides a neutral color profile that can be color corrected to better match footage captured with other equipment. So this is for if you did post-processing. Again, when the color looks more flat, your camera's actually capturing more color, and then you can actually just do color correction and make it look good compared to your other cameras. So I'm just going to stay on natural. The raw audio determines the level of audio processing performed by the camera. So high and medium settings benefit those who want to limit the amount of audio processing required in post-production. low raw audio, let me see right here, is ideal for people who want more flexibility in post-production. And so if you have it off, no extra track will be produced. So these are, when you do this, when you have raw audio on, you essentially have you have a separate audio track. So your microphones are recording a separate file than your camera. So it's putting it in a different file that you can edit later. This is essentially like the amount of audio processing. So we have high audio processing, medium, and low, and then off. So if there was any wind, it would always filter out excessive wind noise. And then off, always records in stereo. But then wind reduction auto is what I stick to, because if I end up going in the wind and I forget to turn this on, then it'll get rid of the wind for me from the microphones. So that was my GoPro Protune settings for beginners. And if you have any requests for any other type of settings in the GoPro for beginner explanations, just tell me in the comments and I'll be glad to record another one, because this is pretty fast since I already knew everything to explain. So if you have any other questions about settings in the GoPro or anything like that, just tell me and I'll quickly record another video and I'll post that. So if you enjoyed this and it helped you, please subscribe and I'll see you next time.